You have been available to people who have never once asked whether you were okay. Not once. Not in all the time you have been showing up for them. Not in all the moments you rearranged your life to meet their needs. Not in all the evenings you stayed on the phone long past the point where you had anything left to give. Not in all the times you absorbed their crisis and carried it home with you, and processed it alone in the small hours of a morning that was supposed to be yours. Not once. And you kept showing up anyway, because that is what you do. Because somewhere in the architecture of who you are, the idea of not showing up for someone who needed you felt more intolerable than the slow, steady cost of always being the one who shows up. Carl Jung had a name for what has been happening to you. He called it psychic depletion, and he spent his career documenting exactly what it does to someone who refuses to acknowledge it until the psyche is forced to acknowledge it for them. Stay with me, because what Jung discovered about the moment an empath finally decides to protect their energy, the specific psychological shift that makes that decision irreversible, is the most important thing you will hear today. And by the end of this, you will understand why that decision is not selfishness. It is the only way to survive. Jung said that every human being possesses what he called psychic energy, not a metaphor, a clinical description of the finite psychological and emotional resource that powers every interaction, every relationship, every act of care and presence and compassionate attention. Most people manage this resource instinctively. Their nervous system sends clear signals. They register depletion. They pull back. They rest. They say no without excessive deliberation because the signal is strong enough to override the social pressure to keep giving. But the empath's relationship with that signal is fundamentally different. They feel it. They feel it precisely and completely. The exhaustion that arrives mid-conversation with someone who only ever calls when they need something. The specific draining quality of a room where tension is being managed through your constant emotional labor. The weight that settles in after spending time with someone who consistently takes more than they give. They feel all of it, and then they override it, every time, because the cost of acknowledging the signal felt higher than the cost of ignoring it, because acknowledging it would have required a different choice. And that different choice would have required them to answer a question they have been avoiding since before they had language for avoiding it. What happens to the people I carry if I put them down? Jung documented this question carefully. He said it is the wrong question, and the fact that empaths spend years organizing their psychological lives around answering it is precisely what creates the condition he called psychic depletion. Not exhaustion, not burnout, not tiredness that rest addresses. The fundamental erosion of the self. The specific psychological consequence of giving from the deepest levels of your interior life to people and dynamics that were drawing from those levels without replenishing them for years, in some cases for decades, until the reservoir that was supposed to be finite is not merely empty, but damaged. But here is what most people do not understand about the psyche. Jung was specific about this. The psyche does not accept permanent depletion without response. He called this the compensatory function of the unconscious, the deep intelligence of the interior life that moves toward wholeness, even when the conscious mind is committed to moving away from it. When the conscious self continues to override the signal, continues to choose the system's needs over its own survival, the unconscious begins to intervene. Not through anger, not through the dramatic collapse that would at least have the clarity of being visible, through something quieter and far more decisive. Jung documented it in the specific moment he observed it across his most exhausted patients. A stillness, a specific interior quiet that was not peaceful, but was precise. The moment the empath stopped fighting their own limits and started accepting them, not as a decision made by the conscious mind, as a decision made by the psyche on behalf of the conscious mind. When the system decides it will no longer participate in its own dismantling, Jung called this the compensatory correction. The unconscious restoring the balance the conscious self refused to restore. And the form it takes in the empath is always the same. A moment of clarity so quiet it barely registers as a decision at all. But that is permanent. Let me tell you what actually changes in that moment. Because it is not what most people expect. It is not the decision to stop caring. It is not the decision to become harder or colder or less available in the obvious performative way of someone who has finally decided to protect themselves. Jung described it precisely. He called it the withdrawal of projections. The moment when the empath stops experiencing the world through the lens of who people could become with enough of their care, and starts experiencing it through the lens of who people have actually shown themselves to be. This is seismic, Because the empath's entire relational life up to this point has been organized around potential. The potential of the person who always needs rescuing to eventually not need rescuing. The potential of the person who takes without reciprocating to eventually understand what reciprocity requires. The potential of the relationship that costs everything to eventually begin offering something back. The empath has been investing in futures that never arrived, and the withdrawal of projections is the moment they stop, not bitterly, not with resentment, with the specific clarity of someone who has finally allowed the evidence to speak without immediately constructing a compassionate interpretation that overwrites what it is saying. Jung called this conscious discernment. The empath does not become cold, they become accurate. And accuracy, for someone who has been operating from projection for years, is experienced as nothing short of liberation. But here is what I need you to understand about this shift, because this is the part of Jung's research that changes how you understand what is actually happening to you right now. The decision to protect your energy is not a boundary, not in the conventional sense of that word. It is an act of individuation. Jung used that word carefully. Individuation is the process of becoming fully yourself, of separating who you actually are from who the world needed you to be, of reclaiming the parts of your interior life that were sacrificed to the role you were performing. And for the empath, the decision to protect their energy is the first genuine act of individuation they have ever made, because it is the first moment they have declared, without apology, without qualification, without immediately following it with evidence that they still intend to be available and giving and understanding and all the things the role requires, that their inner world matters as much as anyone else's, that what is happening inside them deserves the same quality of care and attention they have always given to what is happening inside everyone around them. Jung called this the reclamation of the self from the persona, the moment the mask stops being the face and the actual face begins to become visible. Now let me tell you what happens to the people around the empath when this shift occurs. Jung documented this with clinical precision, and it is important that you hear it clearly. Because if you are at this threshold or approaching it, what happens next will be used to convince you to retreat. The people who have been drawing from the empath's energy without reciprocating do not respond to this shift with understanding. They respond with escalation. The person who only ever reached out when they needed something suddenly reaches out with the specific urgency of someone who has discovered that the resource they depended on is no longer unconditionally available. The family member who never asked how you were suddenly has opinions about the fact that you seem different. The friend whose emotional crises consistently landed on your calendar begins implying that you have abandoned them. The dynamic that required your endless availability to function begins producing pressure in direct proportion to how unavailable you become. Jung called this the collapse of the parasitic dynamic, and he was explicit about what it reveals. It reveals that the connection was never actually about the empath. It was about what the empath provided, the warmth, the understanding, the specific quality of presence that the empath offered so freely that the people receiving it never had to develop their own capacity to generate it. When that provision stops, the people who were drawing from it face something they are not equipped to face. The interior work they avoided by having perpetual access to the empath's emotional resources. And their response to facing it is not gratitude, it is accusation. You have changed. You are being selfish. This is not who you are. Jung said that every empath who reaches this threshold hears some version of those words. And every empath who retreats from the threshold does so because those words activated the exact programming that created the depletion in the first place. The programming that says your worth is contingent on being available, that your value lives in what you provide, that the version of you that protects itself is somehow a lesser version of the one that does not. He said that responding to this programming by retreating is the most psychologically costly thing an empath can do, because every retreat teaches the nervous system that the accusation is correct and makes the next threshold harder to hold. So what actually changes when the empath holds the threshold? When they feel the pressure of the system responding to their withdrawal and do not go back. Jung documented this transformation across multiple dimensions. The body changes first, the chronic physiological tension that had become the baseline of the empath's experience. The specific physical signature of a nervous system running perpetual hypervigilance begins to release, not completely, not immediately, but recognizably. The empath begins to notice what it feels like to occupy a room without automatically scanning it for distress signals that require their response. What it feels like to end a conversation without carrying the residue of the other person's emotional state into the rest of their day. What it feels like to wake up in the morning without the low hum of preemptive emotional labor already running in the background. The creativity returns. The bandwidth that was entirely consumed by managing other people's interior worlds becomes available for their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own interests that had been living in the background of a life too occupied with everyone else's foreground to access. The relationships that survive the shift deepen, because the ones that survive are the ones that were never actually built on the empath's role. The ones where the other person was genuinely present, genuinely reciprocating, genuinely interested in the empath as a person rather than as a function. These relationships do not require the empath to perform. They only require them to show up as themselves. And for the first time, the empath discovers what it feels like to be chosen for that, not for what they provide, for who they are. Jung's most important observation about the empath who makes this decision and sustains it was not about what their life looks like from the outside. It was about what their empathy becomes from the inside. Before the decision, the empath felt everything indiscriminately. Every emotional signal in their environment arrived with the same urgency. The person who was genuinely in crisis and the person who had simply learned that performing crisis generated the empath's attention. The relationship that was genuinely struggling and the relationship that had always been structurally one-sided. The pain that deserved their response and the pain that deserved to be held by the person who generated it. All of it arrived as obligation. After the decision, the empath still feels everything, but now they feel it as information rather than instruction. The emotional signal arrives, and instead of immediately converting to obligation, it is met with a question. Is this mine to address? And sometimes the answer is yes. And the empath responds with the full depth of their extraordinary capacity for care and presence and compassionate attention. And sometimes the answer is no. And the empath allows the signal to be what it is, information about someone else's experience that they have perceived clearly and completely and have determined is not their responsibility to resolve. Jung called this conscious empathy, the transformation of the empath's sensitivity from compulsion to choice, and he said it was the highest psychological development available to someone with the empath's specific interior architecture. Not the suppression of feeling, the mastery of it, not the reduction of care, the refinement of it, not the closing of the heart, the installation of a specific wisdom about where the heart's resources are most genuinely needed and most genuinely received. Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the empath, that privilege has been deferred for years in service of roles and dynamics and identities that were organized around everyone's becoming except their own. The decision to protect their energy is not the end of their generosity. It is the beginning of their life. The first moment they have stepped into their own existence as the primary story rather than as the supporting role in everyone else's. The first moment the extraordinary capacity for depth and feeling and compassionate presence that has defined them is finally being directed towards someone who has always deserved it, themselves. Jung said that the empath who stops being a sponge and becomes a lighthouse does not give less light. They give more because the light is no longer being absorbed by everything it touches. It is being directed with the specific intention of a person who has finally understood that their energy is not a public resource. It is sacred. It belongs to them first, and what they choose to offer from it, offered freely, consciously from a place that has been genuinely replenished, is something entirely different from what was being extracted before. It is not giving, it is gift, and the difference between those two things is the difference between a life that costs you everything and a life that finally begins to give something back. That is the decision. Not revenge, not withdrawal, not the performance of someone who has finally had enough. The quiet, unshakable recognition, made once and held, that your energy is the most valuable thing you will ever possess, and protecting it is not the least loving thing you can do. It is the most. If something in this landed somewhere true, somewhere specific and quiet that you do not always have access to, that landing matters. Tell me in the comments where you are right now. Not the fine version, the real one. And subscribe. Because what is coming next is for the empath who has made the decision and is learning what it means to live inside it.